future doesn't have to be like that. If you step on in to the secret kindergarten, showing you that your young children hold the key to understanding the universe, understanding the self, and therefore, they hold the key to human freedom. Your child is the gatekeeper. Only you can open the gate, and the secret kindergarten is going to show you how.
Welcome to the Secret Kindergarten. I'm your host, Gino, and today's episode is the Grown-Ups edition of the Secret Kindergarten. In today's show, we are taking a break from the troubles of the TV, and we will be looking at one solution to the TV, and that is reading fairy tales. We are going to read The Wolf and the Seven Young Kids. We will look at the symbolism of the story to try and inspire a revival of adults taking charge of the minds of the young and spending time reading fairy tales with an understanding of the life lessons, the rules, the laws encoded within them. Changing the world one fairy tale at a time. Today's fairy tale is The Wolf and the Seven Young Kids. And you can check out previous shows in the Revolution.radio archives. You can download my content for grown-ups or content for kids on all podcast platforms. thesecretkindergarten.substack.com, YouTube, Rumble, BitChute, Odyssey, and thesecretkindergarten.com. And if you want to support me, I provide services that you can find on my website, thesecretkindergarten.com. Thank you for tuning into Revolution.radio, the number one listener-supported radio station in the whole world. So please help support our efforts and airtime by visiting the station's donations section on our website, revolution.radio. Okay, please and thank you. Now, rushing about this morning, so I got to get organized on the go. So I'm bringing up the story. Excuse me, I'm just drinking coffee as I go. Alright, let's read it. The Wolf and the Seven Young Kids. Once upon a time, there was an old goat who had 7 young kids, and she loved them as any mother loves her children. One day, she decided to go into the forest to fetch some food. So she called all 7 of them to her and said, "Dear children, I'm going to the forest, and I want you to be on your guard against the wolf. If he gets in here, he'll eat you up. Skin and bones. That villain often disguises himself, but you can recognize him right away by his gruff voice and black feet." "Dear mother," the kids said, "we'll take good care of ourselves. Just go and don't worry about leaving us here." The old goat bleated and went on her way with an easy mind. But it was not long before someone knocked at the door and called out, "Open up, dear children. Your mother's back and has brought something for each one of you." But the kids knew it was the wolf by his gruff voice. "We're not opening up," they cried out. "You're not our mother. She has a lovely soft voice, and yours is gruff. You're the wolf." The wolf went away to a shopkeeper and bought a big piece of chalk, which he ate, and it made his voice soft. Then he returned, knocked at the door, and called out, "Open up, dear children, your mother's back and has brought something for each one of you." But the wolf had put his black paw on the windowsill, and when the children saw it, they cried out, "We're not opening up. Our mother doesn't have a black paw like yours. You're the wolf." The wolf ran to a baker and said, "I've stubbed my toe. Put some dough on it for me." After the baker covered his paw, he ran to the miller and said, "Sprinkle some white flour on my paw." The miller thought, the wolf wants to trick someone. So he refused. But the wolf said, "If you don't do it, I'll eat you up." This frightened the miller, so he made the wolf's paw white. Yes, indeed, that's the way people are. Now the villain went to the house for a third time, knocked, and said, "Open up, children. Your dear mother's back and has brought something from the forest for each one of you." The kids called out, "First, show us your paw, so we know that you're really our dear mother." He put his paw on the windowsill, and when they saw it was white, they believed him and opened the door. Yet, who else but the wolf stepped inside? The kids were terrified and tried to hide themselves. The first kid ran and jumped under the table, the second into the bed, the third into the oven, the fourth into the kitchen, the fifth into the cupboard, the sixth under the wash basin, and the seventh into the clock case. However, the wolf began to find them and make short shrift of them. He swallowed one after the other down his throat, but he was unable to find the youngest in the clock case. When the wolf had satisfied his desire, he tottered off, lay down beneath a tree on a green meadow, and fell asleep. Shortly after, the old goat came home from the forest, and oh, what a sight met her eyes! The door to her house was wide open. The table, chairs, and benches were turned over. The wash basin lay on the ground in pieces. The cover and pillows were stripped off the bed. She looked for her children, but they were nowhere to be found. Finally, when she got near the youngest, she heard a soft voice calling, "Dear mother, I'm in the clock case." She drew him out, and he told her that the wolf had come and had eaten up all the others. Well, you can imagine how she wept over her poor children. At length she went outside, still grieving, while the youngest kid ran beside her. When they reached the meadow, she found the wolf snoring so loudly that the tree branches above him were trembling. She examined him from all sides and saw that something was moving and wriggling in his stuffed stomach. "Oh God," she thought, could it be that my poor kids that he gobbled up for his supper are still alive?" She sent the little kid home to fetch scissors, needle, and thread. Then she cut the monster's belly open, and no sooner did he make the first cut than a kid stuck out his head. As she cut some more, all 6 of them jumped out, one after the other. They were all still alive and had not suffered the least bit of harm, for the monster's gluttony had been so great that he had swallowed them whole. The joy there was! They hugged their dear mother and hopped about like a tailor at his own wedding. But the old goat said, "Now, go and look for some stones in the field. We'll fill the godless beast's belly with them while he's still asleep." The 7 kids quickly fetched some stones and put as many as they could in his stomach. Then the old goat sewed him up again with such speed that he did not notice a thing, nor did he even stir. When the wolf had slept to his content, he stood up, and since the stones in his stomach had made him very thirsty, he wanted to go to a well and have a drink. However, as he began to walk, he swayed back and forth, and the stones in his body knocked against each other and rattled. Then he cried out, "What's that in my belly rumbling? Could it be my bones are crumbling? 6 little kids I thought I ate. They're more like stones with all their weight." When he reached the well and leaned over to drink the water, the heavy stones pulled him in, and he was drowned in a miserable way. Upon seeing this, the 7 kids ran up to the well and cried aloud, "The wolf is dead! The wolf is dead!" Then they took their mother and danced for joy around the well. All right. So I read that to you all like you were little kids. Oh well, old habits, right? Okay. We are now going to... Well, I started late and now I'm early. Okay. So now, what does a story mean? Besides the obvious, the obvious lessons that might be found there: stranger danger, vengeance, sticking up for yourself, taking action, finding the perpetrator and making things right. These kind of things. There's more to it than that with fairy tales. So we are going to go down the rabbit hole. Starting with having a look at the Oxford Companion to Fairy Tales, edited by Jack Zipes from the year 2000. He's talking about Freud. So I guess, yeah, no kids allowed. This is the grown-ups edition. Okay, so for kids, you can download all of my kids shows. There are about 100 or so of them on all the podcast platforms out there. All right, so now we're talking about what Sigmund Freud had to say about a thing or two, and more. From the Oxford Companion to Fairy Tales, Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic theory attempted to discern the more universal psychology of human behaviour and culture. Freud found fairy tales especially useful for illustrating his theories of the mind because they seemed so much like dreams. According to Freud, both fairy tales and dreams used symbols to express the conflicts, anxieties, and forbidden desires that had been repressed into the unconscious. In writings such as The Interpretation of Dreams from 1900, The Theme of the Three Caskets in 1913, and The Occurrence in Dreams of Material from Fairy Tales 1913, I must get that. Freud demonstrated that the fairy tales used a symbolic language that could be interpreted psychoanalytically to reveal the latent or hidden content of the mind. For example, in his famous analysis of the Wolfman, described in the essay From the History of an Infantile Neurosis, which we are going to look at, Freud noted that his patient's dreams used the same symbolism as the Grimm's stories of the Wolf and the Seven Young Kids and Little Red Riding Hood, to express sexual anxiety resulting from traumatic childhood experiences. Okay, so I just got to say that this is, bringing the fairy tale, the perception of the fairy tale into the adult's world and trying to explain things that might have happened to the individual as a kid. So it's a very adult to adult psychology. It's a very grown up conversation. It doesn't really have much about the kids in there. So I'm not saying it's wrong, because in the mind, because of the law of correspondence, right, the things going on in the mind reflect what's going on in the world and vice versa. As within, so without. So there are many layers to the coding in the fairy tales, and what we're concerned with is, or what I'm looking for, is the shoe that fits for the kids that we read them to. And that is the way to do it. if you check out Rudolf Steiner's work, you find the shoe that fits, and the shoe that fits, well, it's that shoe. And that's the way you do the, essentially, occult work. So it takes a bit of work. So, the Wolfman. Why are the wolves white? It's Sigmund Freud again, 1918 book, The Wolfman. Well, it's a modern publication called The Wolfman, which is from The History of an Infantile Neurosis by Sigmund Freud. Okay, so let's have a look. Let's read it. Okay, The Dream and the Primal Scene. I have already published this dream elsewhere because of the fairy tale elements it contains, and so I shall begin by reproducing what I wrote at the time. I dreamed that it is night and I am lying in my bed. The foot of my bed was under the window, and outside the window there was a row of old walnut trees. I know that it was winter in my dream and night time. Suddenly the window opens of its own accord, and, terrified, I see that there are a number of white wolves sitting in the big walnut tree outside the window. There were 6 or 7 of them. The wolves were all white, all over, and looked more like foxes or sheepdogs because they had big tails like foxes and their ears were pricked up like dogs watching something. Obviously fearful that the wolves were going to gobble me up, I screamed and woke up. My nurse hurried to my bedside to see what had happened. It was some time before I could be convinced that it had only been a dream, because the image of the window opening and the wolves sitting in the tree was so clear and lifelike. Eventually I calmed down, feeling as if I had been liberated from danger, and went back to sleep. The only action in the dream was the opening of the window, for the wolves were sitting quite still in the branches of the tree, to the right and left of the tree trunk, not moving at all and looking right at me. It looked as if they had turned their full attention on me. I think that was my first anxiety dream. I was 3 or 4 at the time, certainly no more than 5. From then on, I was 10 or 11. Until I was 10 or 11, I was always afraid of seeing something terrible in my dreams. He then drew a picture of the tree with the wolves sitting in it, which confirms the description he gave. Analysis of the dream brought the following material to light. He always related this dream to the memory that in those childhood years he would express a quite monstrous anxiety at the picture of a wolf that was to be found in his book of fairy tales. His elder sister, highly superior, would tease him by showing him this very picture on some pretext or other, at which he would begin to scream in horror. In this picture the wolf was standing on his back paws, about to take a step forward, paws outstretched and ears pricked. He thought this picture was there as an illustration to the fairy tale Little Red Riding Hood. Why are the wolves white? That makes him think of the sheep, which were kept in large flocks quite near the estate. His father sometimes took him to visit the flocks of sheep, and he was always very proud and happy when this happened. Later on, inquiries suggest that it could easily have been shortly before the dream took place. An epidemic broke out among the sheep. His father sent for one of Pasteur's disciples, who inoculated the sheep, but after the inoculation they died in even greater numbers than before. How did the wolves get up in the tree? The story occurs to him that he had heard his grandfather tell. He cannot remember whether it was before or after the dream, but the content of the story strongly supports the first possibility. The story goes as follows. A tailor is sitting in his room working when the window opens and in leaps a wolf. The tailor hits out at him with his measuring stick. No, he corrects himself. He grabs him by the tail and pulls it off, so that the wolf runs away, terrified. Sometime later, the tailor goes into the woods and suddenly sees a pack of wolves coming toward him, and so he escapes from them by climbing up a tree. At first, the wolves do not know what to do. But the maimed one, who is also there and wants his revenge on the tailor, suggests that one should climb on another's back until the last one can reach the tailor. He himself, a powerful old wolf, will form the base of this pyramid. The wolves do as he says, but the tailor recognizes the wolf who visited him, the one he punished, and he calls out suddenly, as he did before, "Grab the grey fellow by the tail." The wolf who has lost his tail remembers what happened and runs away, terrified, while the others all tumble down in a heap. In this story, we find the tree that the wolves are sitting on in the dream. There is also an unambiguous link with the castration complex. However, it is the old wolf who loses his tail to the tailor. The foxtails which the wolves have in the dream are no doubt compensation for the absence of a tail. Why are there 6 or 7 wolves? It seemed that we could not answer this question until I expressed some doubt as to whether his anxiety image could in fact have referred to the tale of Little Red Riding Hood. That fairy tale gives rise to only 2 illustrations. The meeting of Little Red Riding Hood and the wolf in the forest, and the scene where the wolf is lying in bed wearing grandmother's nightcap. Another fairy tale must therefore be concealed behind his memory of that picture. He soon found that it could only be the story of the wolf and the 7 little kids. Here we find the number 7, and also the number 6, for the wolf gobbles up only 6 of the little kids, while the 7th hides in the clock case. We also find white in this story, for the wolf has the baker white in his paws after the little kids recognize him on his first visit by his grey paw. The 2 fairy tales have a great deal in common, incidentally. In both, we find people being eaten up, the stomach being cut open, the people who have been eaten taken out again, heavy stones being put back in their place, and finally, the big bad wolf being killed in both cases. In the story of the little kids, we find the tree as well. After he has eaten his fill, the wolf lies down under a tree and snores. I shall have a particular reason to concern myself with this dream in another context, where I shall evaluate it and consider its possible meaning in greater depth. It is a first anxiety dream, remembered from childhood, the content of which gives rise to a very particular sort of interest in the context of other dreams which followed soon after, and certain incidents in the dreamer's childhood. Here we shall confine ourselves to the dream's relationship to 2 fairy tales which have a great deal in common, Little Red Riding Hood and The Wolf and the 7 Little Kids. The impression left on the child dreamer by these fairy tales found expression in a veritable phobia about animals, distinguished from other similar cases only by the fact that the animal that gave rise to the anxiety was not a readily accessible object such as a horse or dog, but one familiar only from stories and picture books. I shall look at the explanation for these animal phobias and the significance that we should attribute to them on another occasion. Here I shall anticipate myself only by remarking that this explanation is entirely in keeping with the main characteristic which the dreamer's neurosis reveals later in life. Fear of the father was the most powerful motive for his illness, and an ambivalent attitude towards any father substitute dominated his life, just as it dominated his behavior in the consulting room. If, in my patient's case, the wolf was merely the first father substitute, the question arises as to whether the secret content of the tale of the wolf who gobbled up the little kids or the tale of Red Riding Hood is anything other than infantile fear of the father. My patient's father, incidentally, had a characteristic tendency to affectionate scolding, of the kind used by many people in dealing with their children, and the teasing threat, "I'll gobble you up," may have been uttered more than once when the father, later so strict, used to cuddle and play with his son. One of my patients told me that her 2 children were never able to feel really fond of their grandfather because he used to frighten them in the course of his affectionate games by telling them he would cut open their tummies. Leaving aside everything in this essay that anticipates how we might apply the dream, let us return to the immediate issue of how we should interpret it. I should point out that to arrive at an interpretation was an exercise that took several years. The patient told me about the dream very early on and quickly embraced my conviction that it concealed the cause of his infantile neurosis. In the course of the treatment, we often came back to the dream, but only arrived at a complete understanding of it during the last months of the therapy. Thanks to spontaneous work on the part of my patient, he had always emphasized that 2 moments in the dream had made the most powerful impression on him. First, the utter calm of the wolves, their motionless stance, and second, the tense attentiveness with which they all stared at him. The sense of reality as the dream came to an end, which persisted after he had woken up, also seemed noteworthy to him. Let us take up this last point. Experience of the interpretation of dreams tells us that there is a particular meaning to this sense of reality. It assures us that something in the latent material of the dream lays claim to reality in the dreamer's memory, and thus that the dream refers to an incident that actually took place and has not merely been fantasized. I am referring, of course, only to the reality of something unknown. The conviction, for example, that his grandfather really told him the story of the tailor and the wolf, or that the tale of Little Red Riding Hood or the 7 little kids had really been read to him, could never be replaced by that sense of reality which outlasts the dream. The dream appeared to point to an incident the reality of which is emphasized by its very contrast with the unreality of the fairy tales. If we were to assume the existence of an unknown scene of this kind, concealed behind the content of the dream, i.e. a scene which had already been forgotten at the time of the dream, it must have occurred at a very early age. The dreamer tells us, after all, that when I had the dream I was 3 or 4, certainly no more than 5, we might add, and the dream reminded me of something that must have taken place even earlier. Those aspects of the manifest dream content singled out by the dreamer, the moments of attentive watching and motionlessness, had to lead us to the content of that scene. We naturally expect this material to be distorted in some way, perhaps even to be distorted into its opposite, as it reproduces the unknown material of the scene. It was possible to draw a number of conclusions from the raw material provided by the first analysis, conclusions that could be fitted into the context we were seeking. Concealed behind the mention of sheep breeding, we could find evidence for his exploration of sexuality, interests that could be satisfied in the course of the visits he made together with his father. But there must also have been hints of a fear of death, since for the most part the sheep died in the epidemic. What stands out most in the dream, that is, the wolves in the tree, led directly to the grandfather's story, the most gripping aspect of which could hardly have been anything other than its connection with the topic of castration, the stimulus for the dream. The first incomplete analysis of the dream had further led us to infer that the wolf was a father substitute, so that this first anxiety dream had brought to light the fear of his father, which was to dominate his life from then on. It is true that even this conclusion was not yet a definite one. However, if we assemble the elements that can be deduced from the material provided by the dreamer, the results of the preliminary analysis, we find the following fragments, which could be used as the basis of a reconstruction. An actual event occurring at a very early age, watching, motionlessness, sexual problems, castration, the father, something terrible. Alright, so that reading doesn't really give us any answers to what we're looking for as the meaning of the story for the young child, because I believe that's what the fairy tales really are for. Families and communities to read, in a child-focused manner. And I think many, eons ago, that's how, we used to go about things on the heath, so to speak. It would have been, I believe it would have been child-focused, and that's how, that informed how, those civilizations would have operated. I'm talking about, cultures that use their intuition and all that sort of thing, right? Which I know almost nothing about, so I'll stop there. Nevertheless, what does the Freud reading give us? Oh, we're running late. I've got to say something about it. Okay, we're going to say that fairy tales pop up in adult dreams. Sigmund Freud would study them and had an interest in that aspect, fairy tales and dreams. So what that does tell us is that fairy tales are in the dreamscape, in the collective unconscious. They are a part of us. And they can mean a number of things, or they can correspond to another number of things. Sigmund Freud was looking at it in the context of trying to figure out what the issue with his client or patient was. But if we look at it's to do with some kind of trauma at an early age, contributing to his mental health issue. So, we're looking at, there's also motionlessness, watching, so not being involved, and an issue with the father, and that's to do with not being involved. So there's like an abandonment thing here, right? Because kids are supposed to have a strong connection with the parent, a bond, a firm, literally like a binding. And anyway, we're going to do our own little look into the symbolism of little different aspects of the story to come up with our own message of the story that supports some of what we've read, but also there's a tidy little meaning that we can hold on to while we read this story to children, which then transfers that idea over to them. Because that's how it works. That's the magic of the bonding between adult and child in the appropriate, in the right way, in the way that it should happen. So we're going to look at the number 7. We're looking at the book The Secret Science of Numerology, The Hidden Meaning of Numbers and Letters by Dr. Shirley Blackwell Lawrence. And we're going to look at the number 7 because of the 7 little kids, right? The 7 says, give me time to think about it. The 7 is the number of spirituality, mysticism, wisdom, and success. Pythagoras called 7 the crooked and the straight. God made the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th. The 7 turns its back on the upcoming numbers, does not start the fervent work of the 8. It looks back in retrospect on all the lessons it has learned in 1 through 6, or to reflect on work well done, just as God looked upon his creation and saw that it was very good. We were told to do likewise. We were told to keep the Sabbath holy, meaning that it has spiritual and moral worth. By resting, we build up our energy for the work we do in 8. The 8 has physical stamina, good health, due to proper rest on the 7th. Okay, so 7, the number of spirituality, mysticism, wisdom, and success. Okay, so we're going to look at, I'm highlighting success. Why? Because, well, I got a feeling about that. And also, Freud's patient was not doing very well, right? So what's the opposite of not doing very well? Well, it's doing well. It's being successful. And success can mean a number of things, but there's a spiritual aspect to the number 7, a mystical aspect to the number 7, both of which human beings have as qualities and we should be working with. And then wisdom, of course. Wisdom is action on knowledge, right? And success. So it's, it's life, good life, a wise life, a righteous life, done successfully. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Okay, so we're choosing success for the number 7. So success being a theme of the wolf and the 7 little kids. Okay, so now we're going to look at the number 6. Okay, so the number 6. Number 6 says, I want my voice to be heard. The 6 is the vibration of home, family, and service. It is man, 1, standing by the family circle, 0. If you can see the picture of the number 6 there, having a 1 and a 0 in the number, or 10, or 6. So it is a number of regeneration. Everybody has 6 sides. Pythagoras called 6 rest and motion because these are important to all bodies for good health. The 6 is known as the cosmic parent for 4 reasons. 1, it wants the responsibility to nurture and care for its family, pets, or those who need care. 2, the vowels of our home planet. Earth. E is 5 and A is 1. Okay, so, numerology start getting kind of like down the rabbit hole here, right? So the vowels of the word earth total 6. All words that vibrate to 6 show an affinity for the body of persons, places, and things. 6 sides. And finally, the circle of the 6 is on the bottom, denoting the womb. The womb's vowel, O, is a 6 letter. Well, there we go. Okay, so there, number 6 is the aspect of home, family, service, regeneration, nurture and care in those places, family and home, and then home planet, Earth. So a wider or a macro version of that, right? Caring for the earth. So I'm going with service. Why am I going with service? Well, if you've listened to my other show, Other World Connections, Wednesdays 2 p.m. Eastern on Revolution.radio, you will see that service plays an important part in living and the life of an occultist, which is really just living life how human beings are supposed to live, why we are here. We need to create goals and service to others. That's the point. That's how we do well. So, number 6, I'm going with, and I'm just trying to get this quick and simple to get an outline, because that's sort of what you do when you write a story, right? So, 6 is service, 7 is success. And those stood out to me, and that's my story for this, and I'm sticking with it. We're going to see if the shoe fits, okay? Right, now there's one other thing. In numerology, there are different types of 6s and different types of 7s, and because we've got 7 kids, and 1 kid did not get eaten, right? So there's the number 1. So there's 6, the 6 that got eaten and the 1 that didn't. So there's a 61 element. Now this is numerology, right? So there's a 61 flavor of the number 7, because 6 and 1 equals 7, right? I'm not an expert. We're just getting these meanings out, right? So let's read from this book about a 61 7, a number 7 where the 6 and the 1 are separated from each other, right? Let's see what that type of 7 says. The 6 always seeks to complete projects. God created the world in 6 days. Number 1 is creative, the doer who initiates projects. 7 has the inner serenity to be in control. It will analyze and probe for facts. This applies to the following 6-1 words: concentration, intelligence, tranquility, visualization, wholehearted, you. So Sigmund Freud had a real thing for just those numbers, 6 and 7, from the dream. So we're going to have a thing for the numbers here. So it's looking to be a little bit like, if the 6 seeks to complete projects, well, the sheep got eaten, the kids got eaten. So it was like an inability to complete projects. And the one left behind was the one who initiates the projects. And there are themes of something to do with concentration, intelligence, tranquility, visualization, wholehearted you, which we've already been sort of talking about from the number 6 and the number 7 separately anyway. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Now let's look at the wolf. Let's look at the book Symbolism, a Comprehensive Dictionary of what the wolf symbolizes. The book is by Stephen Older from 2012. It's the 2nd edition. The wolf symbolizes rapacity, rapine, hunger, hypocrisy, lust, cruelty, anger, aggression, fraud, deceit, the devil, war, warrior, cunning, ferocity, corruption, heresy. Okay, there's heaps, but you get the idea. There's also melancholy. Okay? Now, melancholy was something that stood out because it wasn't immediately apparent to me, but the Sigmund Freud patient was, at a guess, melancholic, depressed. I mean, the guy was growing up and, analyzing dreams and talking about his childhood. He was thinking a lot, right? And melancholy is essentially, let's look at the definition actually. Melancholy, the definition: sadness or depression of the spirits, gloom. It also means pensive reflection or contemplation, which the patient of Sigmund Freud was doing a heck of a lot of, right? He was in a state of melancholy. And for all you conspiracy theorists out there, it also means black bile. Can you actually believe that? Now that's another story for another day from another host on Revolution Radio. But if you know, you know. Oh my goodness. So anyway, when I looked at the definitions and I realized that, melancholy is definitely what we're going with for the wolf. So the story is about depression, melancholy, and, its power to consume you. And I'm going to say how to live a life so you don't end up with melancholy, so you don't end up depressed. I think that's the story of the wolf and the 7 little kids. And part of why I'm picking on melancholy here is because of my time as a teacher, that I see the melancholy happens and becomes a thing from about the age 3, when kids start getting bullied and the state education tells you you're not allowed to stick up for yourself because we have gentle hands here. And gentle hands means those that listen to the teacher don't use their hands, and those that don't listen to the teacher do use their hands. And that dynamic stays. And when the kid that listens decides, hey, I've had enough of this, and does something about it, well, that stands out. And that stands out of the normal dynamic of what's happening in the classroom. And because the teachers are at its stretch, they can't have anybody upsetting the dynamic that they're used to, because it's too much to try and change and to deal with. And the kid that decides to stick up for himself becomes to blame and gets reprimanded. And there the melancholy sneaks in, the depression sneaks in, the disempowerment, the castration seeks in. And I'm talking about, that disempowerment. So that's what's unfolding for me here, okay? Oh, we're running out of time. Okay, so the clock case. So the one that survived, the little kid goat that didn't get eaten was in the clock case. So from Symbolism, a Comprehensive Dictionary, the clock means the universe, order, the march of time, cyclic existence. It's related to the magical creation, there's the word creation, guys, of beings that pursue their own autonomous existence. The attribute of temperance personified. Temperance is a card in the tarot, so we're scrolling down real quickly too. Oh, I'm sorry this has to be so rushed, but we've got to get to the point. Discovering yourself through the tarot, a Jungian guide to archetypes and personality. Now, Carl Jung, disciple of Freud, right? I'm not an expert on all that. I'm just gathering the information here to get the point of the story, because I'm doing this for the kids, okay? I'm doing this for the kids. I'm doing this for the future. I'm doing this for freedom. Temperance. In divination, it means finding the right combination. It means balance. It means adjustment, compromise. It means success will be achieved. It means the healing of ancient wounds. It means patience. It means time. It means moving towards selfless love. I wonder if the patient of Sigmund Freud was just in that dynamic of trying to heal ancient wounds, and that's how he was in the clock tower, the clock case. Temperance is a dark night of the soul experience that can cause discouragement and hostility, as the soul, continually tested, is often unable to see progress. It is on this path that the four elemental energies of air, fire, water, and earth, with their corresponding psychological functions of thinking, feeling, intuiting, and sensing, are balanced. So it's combining a whole bunch of things to balance, all right? So the little kid was balanced, and the wolf, the melancholy, didn't eat him up. So let's go to the summary, okay? A little bit rushed, very basic, but you get the idea here. The wolf is melancholy. So the story is about preventing or destroying this condition, i.e. depression, overthinking, in your life's journey. The 6 goats, who symbolize accomplishment and service, were consumed by the persistent, hungry wolf, by melancholy. Melancholy stops you from accomplishing your goals and being of use and service to others. Look at the antidepressant medication industry. How many people in the world are on that, and how many people suffer from depression, right? Melancholy stops you from accomplishing your goals and being of use and service to others, okay? We don't want to end up on the antidepressants. We want to stop melancholy from getting into the mind in the first place. 1 goat managed not to get eaten. This goat was creative, the doer, who initiates projects. He was saved because he was in the clock case, which symbolizes temperance. So he was in a state of balance. He had combined his functions of thinking, feeling, intuiting, and sensing. He had balanced his thoughts, emotions, and actions. So that kept the wolf at bay. So he had ideas, he was creative, he was allowed to take action on his own ideas and creative projects that he wanted to do, and he was living a balanced life, thinking about, if you think work and rest, or work and play, exercising and diet and all these sorts of things, living a balanced life. And he was creative and allowed to initiate projects, and he initiated his project because that's what it symbolized, right? So, be creative, take action. Create and do projects that are of service to greater things, to others, to the planet. Do this while living a balanced life. Be patient, compromise, have selfless love, and you'll be successful. Don't overthink things. Don't let the wolf get you. Take action on your ideas and use your creativity to make the world a better place. Thank you so much for listening. I love you guys. See you at the next one.